What inspires an author who is a wicked Scrabble player? Let's find out. Hi, my name is Crystal Fletcher, and welcome to All About Books. If you love books, then you've come to the right channel, because not only do you get to meet the person behind the book, you get to find out what inspired them to write it. To keep up to date with the latest author interviews, please hit that subscribe button down there. Today, I am so delighted to have Leslie Vryenhoek with me today. Leslie is an editor, a communications professional, and award-winning author of poetry, fiction, memoir, and articles. We'll be talking about her latest book, We Will All Be Received. And just to give you a little taste about what her book is about, I'll just read a little clip here. In 1977, a young woman steals a duffel bag full of drug money and flees her bad news boyfriend, hitching a ride with a long-haul trucker to the world's edge. She intends to disappear forever, to redefine herself on her own terms as Dawn Taylor. But eventually, stars and satellites align. In a remote roadside motel, Dawn's past catches up with her. Welcome to All About Books, Leslie.
Hi, Crystal. Thank you for having me.
Delighted you're here. So, you are a wicked Scrabble player. Been playing a lot during COVID?
Not as much during COVID, but I grew up playing and played ferociously through my entire life. Yeah, so a little bit online, but mostly I like a live game.
What's the best word score you've ever had?
I think I once got 135 points for 7 letters across a triple.
Nice. Now, I'll kind of get right back to your book here, Leslie. What inspired you to write We Will All Be Received?
Inspiration's kind of a funny thing because it doesn't come from one place, at least in my my case. It's sort of an amalgam of a whole bunch of things that come together, and so I'll think I'm going to write about this, and then all these different pieces start to pile in. What inspired the initial idea was staying in a roadside motel in on the northern peninsula, on the very western part of Newfoundland, the island of Newfoundland. And my husband and I had driven up the spine of the northern peninsula, and we stayed in this roadside motel. And it was just the kind of place that just wakes up your imagination, you know. It was, everything about it was off kilter, and the other people in it were all kind of characters, and it was in the middle of nowhere, you know. I mean, there was, you know, a highway going past, so you'd see truck traffic, but other than that, really, you saw moose, you know. And we stayed there for a couple of nights, and it just kind of stayed, and this was about 10 years ago, stayed in my imagination. This landscape, this very sparse landscape, and this is close to a lot of tourist things like Lanson Meadows, where the Viking settlement was, and a place called Burnt Cape, which is, as it sounds, looks like it's scorched earth, but it's really just a kind of shale that has doesn't grow anything. It's very much like the desert, the kind of plants that come up there, and it's just a really kind of interesting place. But this motel is sort of halfway between the airport you fly into and the nearest town, in the middle of nowhere, and that it just stuck with me. So that then I started thinking over the years about, I have kind of a fascination with this idea of disappearing, of sort of just throwing your life aside and moving on, you know. And so I wanted to write a story about someone who tries to do that in a time when it's become increasingly impossible to do that. Of course, you know, you used to, when the book starts in 1977, you could steal somebody's license and reinvent yourself. You can't do
Yes.
that now with all, and particularly since 9/11, with all the security checks and the growth of the internet and the way that we are now, um, you know, coded into everything. It's just very, very difficult. There's photos on everything, and there's, you know, fingerprinting, and there's, you know, your biometric photograph and all these things. So I wanted to talk about that, to that impossibility of disappearing. But then layered into that was that also it's impossible to escape your past, right? That, you know, I mean, I grew up in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, moved to Manitoba as a young woman to go to university, stayed there, and now live in Newfoundland. But people from my high school still find me, you know, and I have an unusual name. So, you know, it's just like, wow, I was so done with that. And here I am back having this conversation with you again. So, you know, and so while I was writing, there were all the things that were happening around, you know, government officials in the States who then, you know, a picture out of their yearbook was coming back to haunt them some 40 years later. And so it has just become increasingly impossible to escape your past. And so a lot of my inspiration was around, what does that mean for redemption? What does that mean for our idea that people can change and people can improve and people can get past the things they've done in the past that they might regret or that might be regrettable or that might be awful, and move forward. So every character in the book is in some way looking to escape something from their past or to redefine themselves in their own terms in the present. But because the book sort of follows the narrative of the change in communication from, you know, the launch of satellites to where we are now with this incredible World Wide Web and all that that means for us and for culture and for our society and for us as individuals. So a lot of factors really.
Yeah, yeah, and
Tired.
I really love that theme of redemption. And for you personally, do you think redemption is possible?
I do. I absolutely do. I think it's not always possible. I think it takes a great deal of will on the part of the person being redeemed to accept and understand and move forward. But I do think that people can change and change, you know, the beliefs that they held and the ideas that they had and the way they interacted with the world and become better people. Absolutely. I mean, certainly that is true of almost everyone I know. You know, I would not want to be held accountable for who I was when I was 19, you know, because I was kind of a jerk,
I know,
you know, I
I
was like, but I was a jerk, you know.
I know, it's so true. And you'd mentioned that everyone was going through a different journey for redemption. So we've got Dawn, who's redefining herself.
Right, who's disappeared.
Yep. Ethan, who's also trying to escape a narrative from his past.
Mm-hmm.
We've got Cheryl, who's trying to resuscitate her reputation, and Spencer, the ex-con, who's trying to overcome his criminal past. Now, I
Right.
know as a writer, we always are rooting for our characters, and we're so vested in them. Was there anyone in particular who you were just rooting for more than any of the others?
Oh, I was rooting for all of them. I was
Yeah.
rooting for all of them. I think Ethan in some ways the most, because Ethan is not looking to escape the childhood trauma as much as to escape the way he is defined by that, the way his
Yes.
family and the people, when people know what's happened to him, want to define him by that. And I think we've all probably experienced that to some degree, you know, or know people who have, where you get defined by the worst thing that ever happened to you, and it becomes this sort of thing you're expected to carry around if you were, you know, if you had a tragic loss or a tragic thing that occurred. And so I was really on his team in terms of, you know, get free free of that very public, very horrible thing that happened to you.
Yes.
But more so, just be allowed to live your life now. Like, he's
Mhm.
grown up and he's ready to move on, and it seems that no one around him is ready to let him. So I was very much on his side. But I was on everybody's side. You know, I
Yes.
really was
Yeah.
on everyone's side, which was tricky because some of them were, not so much on their own sides. And after a while, I mean, to me, I know a lot of people have a lot of really good control over their characters, but mine just kind of took over about halfway through the book. And, by the time they're all together in that inn, in that little roadside inn, I just thought, I'm going to put them all in the room and see what happens, and I didn't even know what was really going to happen at that point, which made it really fun to write.
And very fun to read. I won't give anything away, but oh my gosh, I did not expect the ending at all. Like, you totally.
Neither did I. Neither did I.
And I love that you gave your characters the freedom to move like that, because it probably
Mhm.
would have been a very different book had you not.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously, it's a work of fiction, and I'm not trying to be precious and saying, "Oh, my characters did what they wanted," but after they sort of, but they did sort of start to move on their own, and sort of, once I knew them, I
Yes.
couldn't really say, well, now I've got to torque you into doing this
Yes.
because it's a better ending. And so that ending, what I could see it coming. And I'll tell you the story of writing the book so you understand. I had been very, very busy. I work for an international organization. I've been doing a lot of traveling around the globe. I'd been sort of flat out busy. I had this book contract. I'd written about 60 pages of it. I'd written the beginning, and I sort of knew where I was going. And then I got super busy, and then I was going to get back to it. And the contract was, for having a book in July, and it was December. And they said, "Can we get your first draft by next month?" And I was like, ah. And then, like 2 weeks later, my mother died, and then I had to deal with all that, and that was awful. And so I ended up with about I got a month's extension and had 5 weeks to write the rest of the book. Now, I'd had sticky notes, I had all kinds of ideas. I'd been thinking about it for 3 years, and kind of making notes and stuff. But I sat in a room, and no one in my house was allowed to talk to me. No one else in my house was allowed to make eye contact. I took over a room, I filled it with food and wine. I'd go out every day and walk down the street and buy a cupcake at the local bakery. That was my treat. And I just wrote. And so it took on a life that was, now I think it just worked. I was lucky because I think I was deep enough into it to just be able to take it. So when I got to where I could see what was going to happen in the end, or what had to happen, I was kind of in that situation where you think, now, where do they go? Like, what's the only possible thing that could happen? And I didn't want to write that ending. I wanted a different ending. So I just for like 3 days, I just walked in circles around it and tried different things. And there was just no having it. That was the ending. That was that was where they were all going.
Well, it's a doozy. Now, you said that, once you got all characters in the room, was there a particular character that was talking to you the loudest over everybody else?
Yeah, in some ways, Jerry, who is not one of the 4. And, it's a funny thing because I knew those 4 characters. I knew I was writing a book that I needed those 4 elements in it. And I wanted to throw them all together. And then Jerry was not supposed to be in the book. Jerry was supposed to be Dawn's ride to Newfoundland, right?
Yeah.
2 pages, max.
Yeah.
In the truck, out of the truck. And the minute he opened his mouth and started talking, I thought, I just knew he was sticking around. And so he becomes the driver in so much of the book. I mean, literally the driver in quite a few scenes. but he just really drives what happens in Dawn's life and how things coalesce the way they do in that inn.
Yeah, and yeah, let's just talk about Jerry for a second. Like, what a character, a trucker, a talker, salt of the earth for sure. And then he's got this incredible love of Elvis, like just
Yes, Elvis and outer space, those are his things, right? I mean, salt
yeah,
of the earth, but all he wants to do is be Han Solo flying around in outer space, right? Like he's obsessed.
yes, yeah,
And which seemed entirely possible in 1977 that we were going that direction. Entirely possible.
it's so with Jerry, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of backtracking a bit.
Yeah.
In your book, you also have a playlist, which I really enjoyed. The songs that were either woven into the story or just kind of in the background, I guess
Mm-hmm.
you were working on it. So with Jerry, like who came first, Jerry or Elvis? Like did you like because Elvis was such a good fit for him? Like did you?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the things about writing, 1977 is way back in the past, but it's probably the first year I remember well because I was a young adolescent. And so there were so many sort of seminal things, like to my head, because that's the year you sort of come into your own. And so the death of Elvis was huge. So I just
Yes.
wrote down all the things I could think of from 1977. And it was
Yeah.
Star Wars, and it was the death of Elvis, and it was
Yes.
Charlie's Angels. And so
Yes.
all of those things kind of just coalesced. And so I thought, and it's September of 1977, which in Canada is when the metric system came into force, and when they put up changed all the road signs quite
Mhm.
rapidly around Labor Day weekend. So I just kind of thought, okay, it's September of 1977. Now, what's just happened in the world? And, the death, I mean, I remember the death of Elvis in
Yes.
August of 77. And then there was thematic stuff, which works its way into the book. And I picked 1977, both because I could remember it and because that's when the first successful sort of test of this nascent internet idea was happening, right? All these big brains
Yes.
were, so it was like that was germinating under the surface, and the first personal computers were just starting to roll off the line. Like it's just a really rich time. So I knew Elvis, was going to come into it. And then I think because these were the earliest pages I wrote, I was just
Mhm.
sort of throwing, all that salad in, and it all just kept coming out of Jerry's mouth.
Yeah, it's like, who is this guy? um, so we'd love for you to read an excerpt from your novel today. And if you could, Leslie, just let us know before you start why you've chosen this particularly, I can't talk today, particular fiction to read.
Well, I'm actually going to read a piece of what we're just talking about when she
Oh,
gets in
okay.
Jerry's truck.
Oh,
Um,
perfect.
and um, and I chose it because it's fun. It's fun to read. You don't have to know a lot because it happens very early in the book. It doesn't give much away. And then I'm just going to read, and then I'll jump forward and read just the last piece of that scene with Jerry. So it's just her transit from, I guess it's the transitional point where she moves from who she was and what
Mhm.
she's escaping to where she's
Mhm.
going.
Right. Okay.
So, okay. So it's 1977. She caught a ride in it. Oh, I should probably say she is on the road hitchhiking because um, she has fled, as you said in the beginning, she's fled a boyfriend. She's grabbed his duffel bag full of drug money. She's realized that he's very bad news, or that he's quite possibly quite dangerous. She's grabbed his duffel bag and taken off in the night in northwestern Ontario, heading, she doesn't know where, she doesn't know why, she's just getting away. She caught a ride in an orange Pinto with a pollster heading for Ottawa who wanted to know what she thought of Pierre Trudeau. When she said she didn't know anything about politics, he said no. I mean, do you think he's sexy? My wife says he's sexy, but I think she's nuts. She couldn't see it either, which made the man smile and pat her thigh like she was his best girl. Then he said, "What about me? What about you? You think I'm sexy?" She said she had to pee first, then she'd show him how sexy he was. He took the next exit, decided he'd take a turn in the washroom too, and while he was gone, she hauled out her bag, climbed up into the nearest truck without even waiting for an invitation. The driver raised a stiff hand like a cop halting traffic. "Please," she said, "just a little way and I'll get out." He looked over at her then, let his hand fall to the seat. "I'm going all the way to the mill in Cornerbrook, godforsaken Newfoundland," he said, "but you let me know where you want out." He raised his hand again, this time just to hold up one finger. "Only thing is, I don't speak French. You speak French?" She shook her head. "Then we don't stop in Quebec. We don't even slow down. And I'm Jerry, by the way." "Thanks for the ride, Jerry. I'm going to Newfoundland too." If he'd noticed that she hadn't offered a name, he didn't remark on it. He just nodded and pulled out onto the Trans-Canada, saying, "Well, it's a great coincidence we met up then." After a few minutes, he picked up the National Enquirer lying on the seat next to her. No, sorry, she picked up the National Enquirer lying on the seat next to her and started to flip through it. She didn't get very far before Jerry asked whether she believed it. Believe what? He ran a big hand through his slick back hair. "The king," he said. "Elvis. Do you think Elvis is really dead? Because some of them newspapers say he's not." She looked down at the stack of tabloids on the floor by her feet, then had a hard look at her driver, at the way his mouth was canting down toward a loose jawline. A hound dog face, she thought, and suppressed a smile. He leaned into his topic. "Some people are saying the story's made up, that Elvis faked his death. You know, just to divert attention so he could slip out the back door and disappear. Have a normal life. Now, wouldn't that be rich if he got away with it?" They drove in silence just long enough for her to read the main article, "Elvis is alive," before Jerry said, "See, it kind of makes sense. Hell, I figure maybe he's got himself a ride on one of them NASA things, the Voyagers. Maybe Elvis is tucked into one of them Voyager space probes they sent up in the last few weeks. And now he's heading for the far edge of the solar system." Shit. She'd hitched a ride with another kind of crazy. She looked in the rearview mirror. There was no Slake in sight, just a truck far, far behind them, and she thought about saying she'd changed her mind and needed to go back west. Could he please stop to let her out? But then they passed a highway sign, and she saw it was in French, and she knew there was no getting out of this truck. Not for a while. So she stays in the truck, and it goes on and on. Space shuttle, and then he tells her all about this great movie he just saw called Star Wars. And then he wants to know why she's going to Newfoundland, and she just defers and ducks and, you know, doesn't tell him where she's from or who she is or anything. Hours later, at the ferry terminal in North Sydney, she and Jerry stepped down from the truck and went to look out over the water. He lit a cigarette, then lit one for her too, and they stood quietly together, listening to the waves. "I never seen the ocean before," she finally said. "Never." Jerry blew a mouthful of smoke out toward the water and told her this really wasn't the best way. "You want to go somewhere quiet, somewhere where it's just you and the land falling off into the sea," he said, "so you can see how huge it is, how it keeps on rolling forever." He flicked his spent cigarette away, took off his jacket and draped it around her bare arms. She gathered the jacket closer and smiled her thanks. It occurred to her that she hadn't looked, not for hours, to see if Slake was coming up behind her, that she hadn't felt this safe for a very long time. The ocean's a lot like space, Jerry was saying. There's so much of it, you could go out there and sail around forever and never see it all. She leaned on the truck, stuck her arms properly into his jacket, and laced her fingers behind her head. The overhead lights reflected off the water, and it was as calm as a swimming pool and as dark as ink. Colonies in space, Jerry was telling her. I'm telling you, the world is about to change more than you and I can even imagine. And then he spotted it. He straightened, shot an arm overhead, index finger pointing to the heavens. Look, he said, see the one that's moving, that bright one there? His finger made a slow arc. Her gaze followed. That's got to be one of them satellites, he said. Satellites, you know, that receive signals from one side of the world and beam them to the other, so we can see something that's just happened half a world away. She searched the sky until she found it, this small, bright point trekking across the heavens, and the sight of it pulled her up straight, too. One day, we'll all get to go up there, Jerry said, and we will all be received.
Thank you. That was great. And
Thanks.
really great. So, what do we have to expect? Or what are you working on right now?
I am working on a couple of things, but I'm trying my hand right now at a screenplay.
Oh,
So yeah, so that's something different, but I realized I really enjoy dialogue and, you know, scene
yeah.
writing. So I thought, you know, and I've got sometimes things are right, you know, you have an idea and it just takes a shape, like, you know, kind of instinctively, is this a poem? Is this a novel? Is this, and I've got an idea that feels very much like a kind of a rom-com screenplay. So I'm going to try it.
Fun.
Yeah.
Good for you. A new adventure.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. So,
Leslie, thank you so much for coming on All About Books and talking about your fantastic book. What I will do is right down below in the description box, I will put links to Leslie's website so you can learn more about her, and also if you'd like to purchase a copy of her book, we will all be received. Thank you so much to everyone for watching today and for listening to our interview. And please come back next Tuesday because I'll have another author and a behind the scenes story. Thank you.
thank you.